Hello, year 11. I'm outside. I encourage you to go outside. Um, I appreciate those of you who asked, checked in on my health. I'm fine. I'm fairly certain it had a lot to do with not being able to get outside. I've got my little yard here in front that I'm trying to do this with. And again, you got to take care of yourself first. You got to be healthy. Make sure you're getting some fresh air and exercise if it's possible. Next, we're going to have to change the way that we approach history. I'm going to be putting videos like this up on a regular basis where I comment on the videos. I can't be leaving it to you to decipher the entire thing yourself. That's untenable. It's not even close to being fair. But I also think that we're going to have classes on a more regular basis too. Office hours will still happen at the same time, but I'm putting it out to you. Come up with a time, any time before, as long as we finish by 8 p.m. I'm not working past 8 p.m., but there has to be a time when we can get together as a class and discuss the things that are being conveyed. So let's start with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working my way through the 2-hour documentary of my notes. And when I get to the point where I feel like I'm just stumbling over my words, or I don't know what I'm going to say next, I'll stop and try to get things together. I'm going unscripted. I'm using my notes. You'll be able to go back and look at this as many times as you want to, and I'll share the notes that I'm reading from with you on this post. So the documentary begins. Oh, by the way, remember, we're looking at not only the causes of the war, but the practices, their impact on the outcome, and the effects of the war. All right? Those are the three big things that we're looking at. Causes, practices, and their impact on the outcome, and effects. So the video begins, Clark Clifford, aide to Truman, 1946, talking about America's place in the world after World War II. We've studied World War II. You know what happened. The rest of the empires crumbled at the end. Although, as we'll look at, say not entirely, the French Empire was still there. France was still holding on to its colony in Indochina. The Dutch were still holding on to Indonesia, a place near and dear to my heart. Imperialism was not completely done. Colonialism was not dead at the end of World War II. And as it talks about later on in the video, and as we've discussed before, Ho Chi Minh, as early as 1918, 1919, was approaching the United States government saying, you should be on our side. We want independence just like you, America. You didn't like being a colony of Great Britain. You fought for your independence. We want that too. And ironically, as it says at the end, Ho Chi Minh was concerned that Vietnam was too small and insignificant for the United States to pay attention to. How wrong he would be about that. But at this point, after World War II, the Truman administration were looking and saying, he said, Russia couldn't touch us in terms of our power. All right? And this is a quote, could not touch us in power. All right? Their military might was they could hold a candle to the number of men they could field, but as far as the Navy and the Air Force that the United States had, the Russians didn't have a chance. The United States came out economically sound, and the quotation I have is that they had a sense of responsibility, sense of a world power that possibly we could control the future of the world. How do they do this? Well, this is part of that peacekeeping. This is part of the idea of one of the best ways to keep the peace is to not let the war start, not let it, or in this case, continue. Truman went with the French. French convinced Truman and the Truman administration that if you let Vietnam fall, it'll go to the communists. And you can't allow that to happen. And as I'd like to talk about in our classes, there were a lot of options, a lot of other options than backing the French and fighting the Vietnamese and keeping communism out of Vietnam. But the United States backed the French, went in, and again, the newsreel says, without American help, the burden would be too great, talking about the French. And by another quote, by 1954, the United States was paying for 78% of the French war in Indochina. So as far as peacekeeping, it could have been kept right there by backing Indonesian, by backing Vietnamese independence. But the United States didn't do that. They got themselves involved in an imperialist war, in a colonial problem, and they got on the side of the colonials. I'm sorry, on the side of the colonizers. So, the next thing we have here is determined not to allow a communist victory in Indochina, as I've just been talking about. Georges Bidault, French foreign minister in 1954, claimed that Dulles offered him 2 atomic bombs for use in Vietnam. Let that sink in for a second. We've already talked about how MacArthur wanted 9 or 13 atomic bombs to go in Korea and just take on China and do it right then. Dulles offered the French foreign minister, like, if I give you 2 atomic bombs, could you get victory in Vietnam? Eisenhower. Then we get through a list of presidents. Okay, Eisenhower talking about why they want tin and tungsten, and then it went to Kennedy, and then it went to Johnson, and finally to Nixon, showing the length of this conflict. It went all the way back to Truman, and all the way back to Truman's decision to, rather than back Vietnamese independence, as would have been, traditional for the United States, they set that tradition. They decided to back the colonizers. I would, at this point, as I start feeling myself ramble, I'd pause here and draw the attention to, how much do you think racism had to do with this? How much do you think the fact that, well, French, I mean, they're white people. I mean, a lot. As an American who said repeatedly, if you want to understand American history at all, you start with racism and you stay there. This is another example. So I'm going to sign off on this one at this point at about 7.5 minutes, and I'll pick up here.